Welcome, Kim. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Deb, and you?
Doing very well. Uh, it's been last 4 years, more than that. We have sat together for this conversation. I think you have covered a lot of water on the bridge,
Yeah,
a lot of
yep,
distance.
yep.
But before we go further into specific things you have done in the last 4 years and more, could you give a brief your background,
Sure.
your work experience, and your broad moments in each sector you have been in?
Oh my goodness, oh my goodness.
So rather than giving
This
us
is where you learn how old I am, Deb.
but give me moments.
Okay. I actually first started as a mental health nurse, and I was working in acute mental health, and I was working with older people with significant schizophrenia, actually. And I saw these group of psychologists do this therapy. They called it remotivation therapy with 75-year-old women. And they took these women down to a house and asked them to clean it. And I thought it was the most abusive thing I've ever seen in my life. So that was a point where I went, well, I will go and do psychology. So I went to uni. I was there 11 years, actually started doing a PhD and in the end took out my master's. But I was fortunate to teach and do a whole bunch of stuff at the unis, and which I loved. I loved that a lot because you were constantly learning and it was a great environment. From there I went into child protection. I was a psychologist in child protection for a while. And then I went to, and that was great, very huge caseloads, very complex clients, and all the really, really difficult clients were children or their families were never referred outside the department. So we would do the really complex, hard end cases, which were difficult and yet quite amazing because you got to work with these incredible children. So that was a really interesting point for me in terms of my development. And then I went to work for Anglicare Australia, Anglicare WA actually, as the regional manager in the Great Southern, managing multiple areas. And it was the first time that Anglicare had gone into a matrix management style. So while I was the regional manager, I was working with under managers and I found that really interesting in many ways. So we were able to integrate some services that hadn't been integrated before, and which is, I think, systemically, I'll think in systems. And so for me, it doesn't make sense to have things siloed. Then I was kind of headhunted out of there by Tracy Westerman and spent nearly 11 years all over Australia as working in Indigenous psych services. So we spent a lot of time in New South Wales, Queensland, mostly New South Wales and Queensland, Victoria, and Kimberley's, and a little bit of time in Tasmania, but working in really complex, entrenched, psychological, but really community-based issues. And it was a time that there wasn't too many specialists who kind of knew how to work with communities where there'd been multiple trauma, multiple layers of trauma as a child, but then the community experienced traumas. And so we were working in a couple of communities where they had just the most horrendous things happen in there. And we would fly in and out of Perth to go and do that because there just wasn't enough psychologists that were doing that work at that time. Beautiful thing is now there's many more Aboriginal psychologists, and Tracy was an absolute trailblazer, and I learned an awful lot, and I'll be forever grateful. But I got in and out. I just banged my microphone. Sorry, people. I got tired of just travelling, so we were on planes every 2 days, and it was just exhausting. So I came back and started working at Uniting, and it was really an interesting point for me because my family system, I grew up with this whole notion of put up or shut up, which means basically you either accept what's going on and just go with it, or you choose to change it, and you have to make that decision. But if you're choosing to just go along with it, stop complaining. And so my career changes has been really because I couldn't shut up, really. So I'm almost like the accidental CEO. So while I was working with Tracy around Australia, one of the things we used to do was a lot of organisational development within Aboriginal community-controlled organisations or in Aboriginal community health organisations at that time. And learning more and more about how those things worked and what worked and what didn't work kind of really pushed me more into organisational life and perspectives rather than pure psychology. And so basically I couldn't shut up. So this is how I'm the accidental CEO. It was because I couldn't shut up. It was almost like the accidental psychologist because I saw something that wasn't okay, and I thought, you either
do something about it.
Do something or shut up and walk away. And my family don't walk away. So that's how I'm here. And I ended up in Uniting as the Executive Manager of Child and Family Services, and then the CEO at the time was choosing to retire, and the organisation needed to have a transition point that would help that to happen, and that was me. So I was appointed as the Chief Operating Officer at Uniting with the whole aim of transitioning one CEO out and helping the next CEO come in, and which is great because I didn't actually want to be the CEO of Uniting, and I nearly knew I'd had my time there. And so I spent 2 years or 18 months transitioning one person out, working with them, and then transferring the knowledge to the incoming person over another couple of years. And then finished work there and then into Parkerville. Now I'm just turned 5 years at Parkerville as a CEO.
Congrats. Oh, there's so much
That's a lot, sorry.
So much to cover. There's so much to cover on that. But I want to delve into more on your experience traveling across the regions and Aboriginal communities. And could you give us the lay of the land in terms of how mental health services, how psychological services are delivered in regional and remote Australia, and then the nuances of every state and every mob, how that differ?
Good question. It's a really good question. The things that I learned is that it doesn't matter how many qualifications you have, it doesn't matter how many pieces of paper, and I've got lots of pieces of paper you have, if you can't sit in the dirt with a community member and listen carefully to what their experience is, you will never actually be able to make any real difference. So I think that's number one. Number one is you can't be arrogant. You can't assume you know what you're doing because you won't know. And you can't assume that the way that you work in, so the Kimberley, for example, and the way that you work in the North Queensland will be the same. It won't be because there's different life contexts and different cultural norms that happen. So I think the other things that I've learned is that you have to be able to learn the language of the communities you work in. So you can't walk in and have flash language using, so flash language, we used to call it flash language. We're going to just teach you fellas all the flash language. We used to say that a lot because people didn't understand the more technical language that was being spoken to them. And most people don't because it's rubbish language, really. It's not meaningful to most people except those who are saying it. So, psychology, we have all these fancy languages that we would use. And if it's not meaningful to the person you're with, well, it's not meaningful. So learning how to translate technical into everyday language and then how to make it relevant to that particular community is critical. And then understanding there's the clinical world that we're taught, then there's the cultural norms, and then there are cultural definitions of what sadness looks like. So you might be taught in a Western construct around what depression looks like, for example, but that's not going to be how all people demonstrate what depression looks like, because culture shapes that largely. And if you're not aware of that differences, you're going to be looking for symptomology that's Western driven that might not be exhibited at all in the culture you work in. So it's learning all of those things. So it's complex, but in many ways it's a deeply respectful way of being because you have to make a difference. And all of us go into these professions to make a difference, right? So if you don't learn how to make a difference in the cultures you're working with, you're actually being part of the problem. And that happens a lot. That kind of answered the question.
Yeah. Lovely. So, and how in that context of different understanding of different cultures and different life context,
Yes.
and changing the language to be more localized, how does that work in child services and family services when you are talking to the young ones?
Yep.
And probably their grammar has not evolved that much. And how do you speak the language and understand intimately the real challenge and support appropriately?
Yeah, good question. Jeff, you always have great questions. Never simple questions, but really good questions. Well, first and foremost, children come from a family context, and the family context is steeped in family systems, so how the family operates as a family, and then the cultural systems that underpin that, which are really deep. And sometimes you can't, you have to look for them. You can't, if you just sat in front of a child and went, I'm just going to deal with you without any context whatsoever, you're actually going to be part of the problem for that child. You actually create a problem for that child because they come from a family system and they come from a cultural system and they come from a community, whatever that community looks like. So your job has to be to understand the whole system around that child. And if that child's going back into that system, enable them to go back with more skills and coping abilities to cope within that system. One of the things I think is quite, or challenging, or maybe not challenging, potentially I think one of the most, this will be controversial how I say this, but anyway, too bad. One of the most, technicians and practitioners can be quite abusive if they don't do that. So if I'm working with a child and just work within my context, I teach them my context and I teach them my language, my norms, and then we put them back into a world that is not my world.
Yeah.
We've actually set that child up
for
failure. But also for the family system to be confused and be angry with the child. So the child then is like, well, the child didn't know. So that the importance of really making sure you're not putting your norms into that child's world is really critical. So I really hate it when we teach children different language and then we put them back in languages for different languages for feelings or different languages for anything, right? If we don't understand where they're going back into in their family or their community, and we teach them something that's not common, it means they can't connect. And we've said to them, well, this is the right way to think. They go back and go, well, everyone's thinking wrong. And actually, in fact, they're not. We've just given the child the wrong language to express themselves. That's simple, not simple.
I think, thank you for sharing that. That's, fairly valued in terms of the understanding of you have to appropriately support the child, the young person, in the context where they're coming from. And if the end game for that young person is to go back in that context, they should understand the norms and structure of that context.
Absolutely.
And then support this person from that context of either its family or community or region or geography, whatever it might be.
I think secondary to that, though, is that sometimes you do need to teach children language because they've never learned it. But then if they're going back into that context, you teach the family the same language. So that at least they can go, I understand what you're talking about, rather than going, what the hell are you talking about? So there's a responsibility on us to go, well, if that child's going back into here, how do I teach that family system to understand where the child's coming from? So for a kid, and that's as important, well, that's actually critically important, so that we actually help the connection and not reinforce a disconnection.
And because your work is primarily, when you work with young people, is whenever there's a bad news. You never go when it's a positive news. You are called upon, it's a bad news most of the times, which is there's some form of abuse happening with the young people. And again, in the regional context, there are some behaviors, some moral behaviors which are moral and immoral. They are right and wrong. There's a clear black and white, whether it is any part of the world that is right and wrong, it's very clearly defined from a human behavior point of view. So how do you translate that in terms of educating the total context of the community, the family, and that individual young person to train the new language that this is right and this is wrong? Because it's not your way of saying things. It is that's the right way of doing things.
Yes.
That's right and that's wrong.
Yes.
So how do you translate that language?
So there's almost like cultural norms and community norms in many ways. Look, it takes time, because if a child is being brought up in a context where behaviour that is in that family is harmful,
Yeah.
it's hurting other people. Now, one of the things that I think a cultural norm is around the world is treat others as you would wish to be treated, or similar. Do not harm others. I think that's a norm that's fairly common across all cultures. So when you're working with children who've been harmed, there is a really interesting sort of, not interesting because it's awfully sad that they've been harmed, but it's helping them see, A, that what happened to them is not who they are, they're more than that. And B, it's helping them look around and going, well, is that normal in other areas? Do you see that that's normal in other areas? And it's not about demonising their parents or whoever harmed them. It's really about helping children understand that there are other options on how to behave. And just because they grew up in a particular world that didn't show that, there are other templates that they can look like. One of the things I love about the men that work with us in our organisation, I love the men that work with us in our organisation, and they're not in a creepy way, They go through all sorts of tests like everybody else in the organisation. We have multiple tests around. We have police checks, but we also have special tests that are done by the Department of Communities to make sure that our staff are safe to work with children. And the men that work in our organisation, the women are just amazing. The men that work in our organisation are they're like gold. It's like a treasure chest for me, because 97% of the children that we look after or come into our services, our therapeutic services, or have been harmed by men. So they've not always seen what a good, kind man can be.
Yeah.
And so when we have our men work with the kids, or they see men around and they see that they're good, they're kind, they're wanting to make sure everyone is okay, it gives the kids another idea of what's possible. So you can provide templates, if you like. It's like the children have been harmed by women, and there's quite a bit of physical harm by women as well as sexual harm by women. Again, it's the same thing. They're seeing women who don't do that. They see women who behave in different ways and communicate in different ways. So when they're given ideas of what things can look like, they're able to make different choices. Does that make...
Yep.
Yeah.
Could you also elaborate on the definition of harm? Because harm can range from something to everything. But if you can define harm, and also, I'll ask the second part, but if you can define the breadth of harm for young people.
There's a recent research that came out around harm that occurs to children growing up. And there's a number of types. I mean, there's the obvious one. There's sexual harm, sexual abuse of children. Our staff work with babies all the way through to younger adults, and it happens to all ages. And that has really enormous impacts on development and a whole. It's not just the sexual harm. It's the impact on development. It's impact on capacity to learn. It has really long-reaching, harmful impacts. Physical harm is like violent, aggressive behaviours towards children. That can be broken bones, it can be bruises, it can be cuts, all sorts of things. Then there's emotional, psychological harm. So if I tell you for your whole life, from when you were little, how useless you are, how ugly you are, how stupid you are, and I'm your parent and I'm telling you that, what that does is embed an idea of yourself as being less than or not good enough. And that harm then changes how you make choices. You'll choose choices that you think are reflective of your value. So if, for example, you were told how bad you were, how horrible you were, how useless, how ugly, how stupid, you're more likely to get into abusive relationships. You're more likely to have mental health issues. You're more likely to have all the negative long-term impacts. And recent research on child maltreatment says about 70% of Australian people have had that experience in various forms. That's a lot of people that have had that psychological, emotional harm. Then there's neglect. Neglect is where you don't have the food to help you survive. You don't get to go to school because for some reason you're being excluded from school and learning. It can be that you have medical issues and you're not getting the medical support that you need. It might be that you have a developmental delay and you're not getting the supports. Or it might be that you've got a disability and you're definitely not getting the supports or the aids that help you. And can be neglect because you've been kept awake all night. There could be neglect of all sorts of different things that impact on your ability or your developmental trajectory, but also your concept of yourself and a whole bunch of other things. So that's harm. So it's kind of broad.
And from a, do you mind portraying us? Let's not go to the worst of the cases, but or if you can, what's the distribution? What are the majority of the cases which you have of young people? Which category of harm they have, and then what are the longer term and short term effects on this young person?
Good. Okay. Oh goodness. I'm just trying to think about how to talk about it relatively simply.
That's fine.
All right.
Too complex.
Let's
do complex. Let's do the flashy language.
I'm not going to do the flash language because it's just like I think it's so exclusionary to use the flash language. So I'm so anti it. Sorry to my uni people. Right, so what really happened, the child maltreatment study is a really good example of where there's been this study that was released last year. It's the only study in Australia that's looking at the general population around the impact of different forms of maltreatment. And as I said, about 70% of Australians have had some form of verbal abuse or some form of put down or some form of psychological emotional abuse. I mean, that's a lot of people. If you have just had that experience, and that sounds terrible, it's not meant to minimise that, but because that's quite really damaging for people, you're more likely to, and depending on how much and how often and your capacity to deal with it, and your capacity to get help and a whole bunch of other things, but you're less likely to reach your potential. You've been told you're stupid, you're stupid, you're stupid, you're stupid. Children internalise what you tell them, and it takes a long time to either go, actually, no, I'm not. In my family, really good example, my family were farming families and girls were not particularly important. I'm the most well qualified, I have the highest job, and the boys, they're always better than what I do. So, but I was taught that, so I had to spend a long time working on that to go, actually, no, and also, look what I'm doing now, which is a nice sort of thing. But there's because I could have internalised what I was being told, and I chose not to internalise it. Actually, I got to an age and I realised that I wasn't ever going to do that. But not everyone has that opportunity to do what I've done or other people have done. So that's one simple explanation. Sadly, though, most people who have some form of emotional psychological abuse do have other forms as well. You're more likely to have 2 or 3 forms of abuse. So if you have the psychological abuse, you're also more likely to have some sort of physical abuse. And that's when it becomes compounding, the impact of it.
Survey and research said that one of the biggest indicators of abuse in a family situation, in a mixed family situation, where there is a step parent.
Yeah.
So that increases the probability of harm and abuse for the young people by multifold.
Yep.
And that's the strongest indicator of
Yep.
harm happening because you have a step parent in the household.
Yep.
So what's your observation in the demographic you're working in of that happening, and what are the learnings?
Gosh, I don't know if I answered your first question well enough, but I will come back to that at some stage. Look, where there's been relationship and family breakdown and there's a new relationship, there's definitely risks around how those families meld and integrate. And some families do it exceptionally well, and some families, of course, do not. and you have a higher risk of youth homelessness, you have a higher risk of not necessarily of all the abuses as much, but there is definitely a higher risk of harm happening where that family system don't gel well. So we do work with a number of families like that and young people and children like that. And invariably, it's because the idea of families changed and that capacity of the family to be inclusive of everybody is limited. And it actually might be because the step-parent actually doesn't like the child. And it's easier to not like a child when it's not yours. Because all the norms tell us we have to like our own children, we have to love them and like them, and you know, but if you're the step-parent, that's a lot more difficult. And when there's been relationship breakdowns and the young people that we work with, that's definitely one of the roads to homelessness. You know, that the child might get kicked out, or the child feels as though they're getting kicked out, or the child is not being treated as well, so they run away. And we do see that quite a bit. And then we also see higher risks for mental health, alcohol and other drug issues, and a couple of other things that happen as a result of that. Because if you can imagine, you from a young person's world, you're still creating your identity, who you are, and all of a sudden there's no safe place for you to be. And kids, doesn't matter what their age is, internalise that as something really bad about them, and so self-medicating and doing other things can happen. And I think that kind of answers your question. I think it kind of answers your question. Is it a bigger risk? It can be, yes. But then we also work with children, and there's about 90% of children who come through our sexual abuse services who are harmed by family members, biological family members. So it's not just the step family system.
I want to ask a more broader question on the sexual harm side of it and sexual abuse of whether they are family or they are step family. What are the again, you know, big chunky longer term issues, and in terms of, you know, their indicators, like, you know, how is the education going for this young person, you know, how's your opportunity to have meaningful relationships with other people, how's the life of being a normal adult, you know, just getting a house, getting a job, how does that normal life become so far-fetched or so accessible?
That's a really good question. I want to couch this in probabilities. It's like it's not. A child can be sexually harmed and still go on and live a good life. What happens to a child is just one part of who they actually are. They're far bigger than the sexual abuse, right? They're far bigger than what happened to them. And when children have the right systems and supports and family and connection to community and culture around them, they are much more likely to go on and live good lives. So I want to put that into context, because that's a really important message there, that one of the most beautiful things that I see in the work that I used to do and what my staff now do is that those kids are just amazing. They're just incredible. So I want to put that couching on that, because I think there's a bit of a myth around, well, if you're sexually abused, you're going to go and harm another person. Well, that's not necessarily the case at all. There's a very small number that actually do have harmful sexual behaviours, and that is because of their anxiety and what's been taught to them, and so they have this behavioural set of responses that is really as a result of what harm had occurred to them, that they act out on others. That's a very small number relative to the large number that are abused. So the trajectory, if a child or young person doesn't get the support that they need and doesn't get the right support, doesn't help them have connection to family, culture and community with safe people, and who is maybe left in harmful situations, mental health issues, alcohol and drug, homelessness, really poor relationships, high risk of being in family domestic violence situations, poor relationship decisions. There is trust and safety issues. and which are all understandable in the context of what happened to them. So I'm so anxious about not demonising, or putting a negative story around these kids.
But some people will turn around their life. And then some people will get the right supports. They will have a normal,
Yes.
close to normal life as
Yes.
much as possible.
Yes.
But there are chances of, slippage.
Yes, of course.
Because there is harm done, and,
Yes.
and it's not just sexual harm; it's a psychological harm as well, in a way.
Yes. Does it interrupt development? 100% it
Yeah,
interrupts development.
yeah.
Does it interrupt education? It can do.
Yeah.
One of the things that we're actually just putting together now is we're designing a therapeutic school because we work with a whole bunch of children that the education system doesn't cope with their behaviours, and they are failing, and the system fails them. So as soon as that education compartment is limited for them, it's going to limit their whole life trajectory.
Yeah.
And so we're actually going to put a school together,
Lovely.
which is a bit, well, we're in a really privileged position as an organisation. I keep saying to people, the only reason we're doing that is I have 200 experts in trauma that can help that school in any minute or time, or teachers, because I have this brilliant bunch of people who work for us, who work with traumatised children, who are able to do the most amazing things to help a school. And that's why we're doing it.
In a broader general sense,
Yep.
General younger population have higher levels of anxiety comparison to
Yep.
their previous generation, and it's been increasing, partly because people are more tuned to what they emotionally feel, and they are speaking out, but partly of what's happened, whether they were young and what's the cultural context. So could you also put more light on why there is higher cases of ADHD, higher cases of mental health issues in the younger generation these days?
I think some of the points you raised are true. I think there's more awareness. I think we cannot underestimate the impact of COVID. We certainly are seeing, since COVID, we're certainly seeing across the world massive increases in anxiety in young people, significant increases in concern about the future. COVID was one part of that, but then young people are looking at environmental damage. They're looking at, Palestine and Israel, and going, what sort of life is there for me if this is what is happening? So that definitely creates more impact on their anxiety levels. And that doesn't necessarily, what am I trying to say? That is people who are from all backgrounds, all cultural backgrounds, are going, what is happening in the world environmentally, what's happening, doesn't feel safe. So the anxiety is definitely increasing, and existentialists such as myself would go, well, existentialism is really about your life trajectory, and everything's around the meaning of life and death and everything in between. Would say, well, it's definitely existential angst built off what their experience has been. Now, if you're a young person, before COVID, the freedom to be, you were never locked down, you never had any experience of death being totally in your face, where COVID, certainly the languaging originally around that was everyone's at risk of dying. So it definitely created an increased level of fear for everybody, parents, and then they should put that onto their children.
From a workforce point of view, we were discussing earlier, what kind of a psychology, or what kind of a person is attracted towards working with younger people who have gone through harm at different levels, who have to work with people with trauma in and out all the time? So what kind of people are attracted towards those roles? If you can just give a broad understanding, what you have to have in the personality in me for me to work as a mental health person, and who's working specifically with younger people with these challenging situations and harm and cultures and all of, what kind of person should be?
Gosh, damn, simple question. Okay, I can tell you what we do. And probably what I've always done my whole life in terms of employing people is 100% they have to be aligned around child-safe practices, which means that they have to be able to hear and listen to what children say and respond to them from the child's view. They have to be able to be humble. They have to be able to be accepting of a whole bunch of different varieties of behaviours. And they have to also be able to go earlier, very much earlier in this conversation, I spoke about needing to understand the culture, needing to understand the family system, and needing to be able to help that child navigate all those things. So they have to be able to think systemically. They have to be able to think and in ways that enable them to help navigate all of those different bits and pieces so that they are not doing inadvertent harm. That's really important. The values part is critical. Really wanting a better life for children and their families, not just for children, but they're also their families. Qualifications are important, but if somebody came to me with a PhD, I think I have 20 PhDs, and they treated my receptionist really badly when they first came to the organisation, and they were quite arrogant or something, they would never get a job with me, and they would never get a job working with children with me, because it tells me it's all about them and not about the children. What else do we do? I think we test people on their capacity to cope with really challenging information. One of the beautiful things about children, and one of the risky things about children, is that they will protect the adults from the information that they have about what harmed them, because they don't want to make someone feel sad. I mean, kids are amazing. They're just the most beautiful, amazing creatures. I mean, if you can have that value, you're going to work for me, right? But they are just so generous and so incredibly amazing. But in their incredibleness and amazingness, they put themselves at risk because they will test you to see if you can cope with their story. They'll give you a little bit. And if you react badly, they're not going to tell you their whole story because they think you can't cope with it and they don't want to hurt or harm you. So the people that work with us have to be able to cope with what a child will tell you and be able to hold that and not react in it, and not react and get angry with the people around them because the child doesn't want that necessarily to happen. So it's how do I choose people? Take all of that.
Yes.
And take things like their past experiences, take things like, I'm thinking of some of the people that I've employed, and some of them you would never think, well, why are they working? If you'd just met them and you'd seen their qualifications, you wouldn't understand why they're working in that particular world. And it is because they had a quality that enabled them to be very present and child-focused. And the capacity to be really child-focused is fundamental to the work that we do, because you're not going to react to the things around you. Like if mum and dad are behaving badly because something's going on in mum and dad's world, if you react badly to that, that's actually not going to go well for that child, right? Yeah. So your capacity to go, well, something's happening for mum and dad, I need to just step back a bit and just work with the child for a bit, and then we'll go back and talk. That enables that healthier response for that child, because that's the child-focused way of working. The also is those people have to be really brave. So if something's not happening well for that child and you think there's something's a bit sus or a bit dodgy, our staff or anyone who works with us, volunteers or staff, have to be brave enough to go, I need to get some support and work out what's going on here, because we can't put that child at risk.
Lovely. Broadly speaking, from broad workforce who work in this space, and then broadly in mental health space, people carry a lot of trauma of their own.
They do.
And everybody has gone through life, because life happens, and then people, and then a variety of harm has happened. Everybody in some way or form. There is part of the population which takes their own trauma, and then when they are working with other people with trauma, and how many? So what do you see that happening? How do you see that playing? That my trauma and your trauma, and then
connects.
It connects. How does that person as an employee or as a person who is a support person
Yep.
for somebody who has gone through some form of trauma,
Yeah.
is good, bad, ugly?
Okay. I'll use some flash language and then
Yes,
I'll
please.
translate it. So,
Yes, please.
look, there's a lot of transference and counter-transference that can happen. So, my experience, for example, if I'd had an experience of abuse in my lifetime, I hadn't resolved it. So, my experience will be driving my behaviours in some way. I might work with you who may have the experience that I did, for example. Instead of listening to you, I will be pushing the version of what you're telling through my own filter of what happened to me. And then there's this thing that's called projection. So then I'm projecting my story onto you and I'm actually not listening to you. I'm actually working out my own history through the conversation with you, which is really harmful, actually. It happens a lot. I mean, supervision training is really part of helping that to not happen. Because people who have had harm done to them are amazingly compassionate, kind, generous, incredible people themselves, right? And for them to be able to work really well with children, they have to have resolve what's going on for them or what happened to them and be able to call an existential world. This is another technical bit, bracket it. It's this whole construct of idea that the harm that was done to me, I can never be undone. But what I can do is I can put a bracket around it while I'm working with you. But that requires me to do a lot of work on myself, supervision, and honesty when in the supervisory relationship around, actually, this did actually happen to me, and this child I'm working with is triggering it. So that kind of, and this projection and transference and counter-transference. Transference is I'll put onto you what should have happened to me, and then you react. So a classic example is that I'll have my filter on about what happened to me, and I'm talking to you as a child, right? And the child becomes a therapist for the child, for the adult. That's so unhelpful because you're not actually helping that child.
Yeah.
It's your stuff that's being acted out, and that's transference and counter-transference. In its very simplest form, those tech nuts, in its very simplest form. So there really is important around understanding that people will be attracted to this work because of what happened to them. But also, one of the most wonderful things about that is that those people know at a really deep level how important it is this work actually is. And so helping them to identify their own stuff and actually get that worked on is helpful for everybody, including that person, but it also makes sure that the child's not wearing something they shouldn't have to.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.